Mr. Clark Kent lives in an average neighborhood in Rochester, New York. He's been seeking ways to be more environmentally friendly and actively promoting this awareness to others. He is striving to become the green eco-standard for his neighborhood and set a positive example for current and future neighbors. After conducting a little more research on global conditions, he noticed how large the population is becoming. According to the CIA.gov website, as of March 2012, the world population is estimated to be around 7.02 billion. Mr. Kent was overwhelmed by this number and began to think deeper about how quickly certain resources would be exhausted if further conservation steps were not taken. He understood that his scope of control was limited. But decided to focus on his utility consumption because he knew that many utilities were supported by non-renewable resources and had a direct impact on the environment. The utilities he has been consuming included water, electricity, natural gas, sewage, trash, and phone. Here you'll see one example of a utility. Recently, Mr. Kent came upon a website that shared average household utility cost and usage across the upstate New York region. He found that the average monthly utility cost for his size house in that region was roughly $305. After some consideration, Mr. Kent felt that if he could lower his utility cost, then this would mean less usage of non-renewable resources. This would make him more environmentally friendly. So he took a quick inventory of his utility bills over the last 12 months and found that, on average, he was spending approximately $329 per month. He felt somewhat upset by this finding and determined to do something about it. So Clark began to look at various types of data to become more strategic in his problem solving. He started by looking at all the utilities he currently used, as seen in these next two tables. When Mr. Kent compared his usage to the regional average, he noticed that there seemed to be larger gaps in the winter months. After collecting the initial data, Clark called the electric company to see if there were some general guidelines as to what household item used the most electricity. The specialist at the electric company provided the following information. After receiving this information, Clark decided it might be best to evaluate his electric heating unit. So he went down to the basement where the electric furnace was housed and decided to follow the process for heating the house. He first set the thermostat at 70 degrees. He waited for the temperature to drop below 70 degrees to see if the furnace would start. And he saw that it did. Next, he went and placed his hand on the unit and could feel the warmth. He then went upstairs to see if the air was flowing out of the vents properly. He noticed that the airflow in his main room, the one with the thermostat, was a little weak and not very warm. He could barely feel the air from the vent more than a few inches off the ground. You'll see the vent in this next picture and a schematic of the airflow in the following picture. To investigate further, Mr. Clark Kent called his neighbor, Ms. Lois Lane, to see if he could come over to her house to feel the airflow coming out of her vents. Once over at Miss Lane's house, Clark noticed that he could feel air coming up from the heating vents more than 4 feet above the vent. Clark then started to think about the possible causes which he could investigate. He initially thought of the possibility that the filter was not functioning properly or was just dirty and needed to be replaced, so he decided to investigate that. When looking at the filter, Clark had always been very adamant about using a marker to note the change of date on the filter. When he pulled and visibly inspected the filter, he noticed that the filter was still within 1 month away from the recommended change date, but that there was a noticeably large amount of dust on it. He then remembered from his discussion with the heating specialist, while his furnace was being installed, that dirty filters could impede the airflow from the heating unit into the vents. Clark then knew that the filter was doing its job, but needed to find out where the excessive debris was coming from. He decided to investigate further to see if there was something clogging the vents, sending large amounts of dust and debris into the filter. In order to do this, he would need to contact a local heating company to come and inspect the vents. When the heating expert came to inspect the vents, he first checked to see if there were any leaks in the ductwork, as his experience had been that this usually is the root cause. After examining the ductwork, he found no leaks. However, he noticed there was a large deposit of dust and debris in one of the vent elbows, in one of the main rooms facing the doorway to the outside. The specialist also noted that when the front door was opened, it would create a draft which blew dust down the vent, past the elbow, and into the downward vent leading to the filter. You'll see that in this next picture. It was clear that Clark was making progress as to finding the root cause, but he still could not find out where the dust was coming from. In order to dig a little deeper, he decided to see what type of debris was sitting in the elbow, so he could better understand where it was coming from. Luckily, the vent elbow was within reach from the floor, and Clark was able to scoop up a handful of the debris. When he examined the contents, he noticed something interesting. There were several pieces of cereal, cracker crumbs, and other small particles that would sweep off a kitchen floor. He then reflected on all the new things that had happened in the house over the last year. Last summer, he had decided to remodel the bathroom upstairs, and that project took about a month. Also, the family had just gotten a new pet last year, a playful and rather large golden retriever. Finally, he also remembered that he began assigning his 7-year-old daughter, Alexia, duties around the house. One of those duties was sweeping the main hardwood floors. In exchange, she would get an allowance every Saturday. With all of this information, Mr. Clark Kent felt confident that he could undertake this problem and solve it.